It's not about how much you make. It's learning how to manage the money that you make. This is one of the key lessons that I've learned as a successful business owner and a real estate investor over the past decade. Whether you make $50,000 a year or $5 million a year, the strategies that the top 1% implement to build and grow their wealth can be applied by anyone. Now, I'm not going to sit here and throw a bunch of arbitrary rules and numbers at you today. Instead, I thought it would be much more beneficial to talk about things that I have implemented in my own life and found success with. If this is a topic that resonates with you, then please do me a huge favor and like this video, subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you here. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you never miss another money-making tip. Let's get right into it. Principle number 1, have an emergency fund. Now, for me personally, this is an absolute non-negotiable. For most people, I recommend having 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund saved up. I personally prefer to lean more towards the 12-month mark simply because I'm self-employed. When it comes down to it, the reality is that life is just unpredictable. Even if you work for someone else, maybe your company completely goes out of business. Maybe they have budget cuts and your job has to be cut. Maybe, God forbid, there's a medical emergency, or maybe there's an unforeseen circumstance like a wildfire, a tornado, a hurricane, something like that, and you end up losing your home or needing extra funds for something like that. Now, obviously, these situations are not fun to think about, but that doesn't mean that they're not a possibility and that you shouldn't be planning for them in case they do happen. Now, I personally would rather plan ahead and have a bit of a nest egg set aside just in case one of these situations does happen, rather than have to figure out and stress even more about money while any of these already very stressful life events are currently happening. And unfortunately, this happens to people on a daily basis, and they end up having to go into massive amounts of debt. Maybe their home is foreclosed on, maybe their car is repossessed, or maybe they just can't afford housing, medical bills, anything like that to even begin with. And actually, a recent Bankrate survey found that as much as 56% of Americans can't even afford an extra $1,000 expense. Now, I personally like to use the NerdWallet emergency fund calculator, so I'll pop that up on the screen right here. And I really like this resource because you can input all of your monthly living expenses individually, and then it will basically take all of that information, figure out the bare bones amount that you'll need to have saved to continue living as you currently are for that 3 to 12 month period while you get back on your feet. As long as you can pay all of your other bills, I would say that this should be your absolute top priority. And if thinking about saving 3 to 12 months is really overwhelming, maybe you get a number like $30,000 or $50,000. Yes, that could be extraordinarily overwhelming to some people. Then start with just 1 month, because I would rather you have 1 month to basically help you just scrape by, help you find another job, give you the time that you need to kind of get back on your feet than to have absolutely nothing saved at all. And at least during that time, you know that you could have your very basic needs met. Principle number 2, invest early and often. Now, there's a reason that Einstein is so often quoted for saying that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. Because if you understand how compound interest works, then you can very easily put your money to work for you. Now, sadly, the median retirement savings for people of retirement age is merely $200,000. Now, typically in retirement, you withdraw 4% of your invested money to live on each year. And that basically ensures that you'll have enough money to live on for 30 years if you live for 30 years into retirement. Now, with just $200,000 saved, that means that you're living on merely $666 per month. And saying that, I want you to honestly ask yourself, do you think that you could realistically continue to live the lifestyle that you currently are on just $666 per month? Now, for most people, myself included, the answer would be absolutely not. Granted, most people will receive a Social Security check, but even if they receive the average amount, which is roughly $1,700 per month, could you live on less than $2,400 per month for the rest of your life? Would that ever afford for you to buy a new car? Maybe you have already paid off your home, but maybe potentially you need a new roof on that home. And of course, insurance will cover a portion of that, but you do still have to pay a portion out of pocket. Would $2,400 a month be able to afford you to do that and to pay for other basic living expenses, especially as you're aging and you potentially need more medical care, more accessories at home to get around the house, additional prescription medications, all of those things that you need to consider. And aside from paying for the absolute bare bones, would living on $2,400 per month, in addition to having an emergency fund with that amount of money, actually allow you to enjoy the life that you're living? Could you go on a vacation if you wanted to? Could you help your kids pay for college? Could you potentially pay for future children's weddings? Would you be able to treat yourself every now and then and not feel guilty about it? So think about the kind of lifestyle that you'd like to live, the things that you would like to do in retirement. And then think about realistically, how much money would you need to have coming in to be able to afford a lifestyle like that? Now, I wanted to provide some really solid evidence that investing early and often can truly pay off in the long run. Now, in our example here, we're going to have two friends, Martha and Samantha. Let's say, for the sake of this video, they make the exact same amount of money, but what they do with their money is very different. So on the left side of our screen is Martha. She lives it up in her 20s. She's living in the here and now. She's not thinking about her financial future, and she really doesn't do so until she is age 35. On the other hand, was always told that planning for her financial future was so important. So when she graduated from college at 22 years old and she got her first adult job, she started saving for retirement immediately. Let's say that each person started contributing $5,000 per year every single year. Now, to make that a little bit more manageable, that's roughly $96 per week. Now, if you feel like you don't have an extra $96 per week to contribute from your normal day job, I wanted to break this down and just say that that's roughly driving Uber for 1 day per week. Now, if you want to work from home, maybe you want to start an e-commerce business or any kind of online business, I highly recommend that you check out the rest of the videos on my YouTube channel. I have been a full-time e-commerce business owner for roughly a decade and have had great success in doing that. And so all of my videos on my YouTube channel basically walk you through exactly how to start your own version of your e-commerce business. All right, so back to our example. So Martha is starting to invest that $5,000 per year every single year at 35 years old, while Samantha is starting to invest that $5,000 a year every single year from 22 years old. And they both contribute until they're 65 years old. So that's 30 years of contribution for Martha and 43 years of contribution for Samantha. So let's say they see an average S&P return of 8% compounded annually. By the time Martha retires at 65 years old, that $5,000 that she invested every single year will be worth roughly $662,000. Now, on the other hand, that's nearly $2 million for Samantha. So based on that example alone, you can see how important it is to invest early and often and really let that compound interest go to work for you. Now, one more thing I wanted to add here. So if you work for someone else, if you work for an employer, I highly recommend that you look into employer matching for whatever retirement account you're investing in. So employer matching is essentially where your employer agrees to contribute the same amount to your retirement fund up to a certain dollar number. Now, if you're sitting there and you say, I've literally never heard those words before in my life, Melissa, I don't know what you're talking about. I highly recommend that you go and talk to your boss. You send your boss an email, you talk to your fellow employees, because a lot of places do offer employer matching for your retirement account. This is a 100% return, which you really will not find anywhere else. And that is essentially free money. And if your place of employment does offer this, you should take it. Again, I will say you should take it. So let's say, for example, you make $60,000 a year, but your employer offers a 5% match. So that means that for every dollar you contribute to your own retirement account, let's say the limit is up to $3,000 per year, your employer will contribute the same amount. Now, if this is offered at your place of employment, I highly, highly encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity. Because again, this is a 100% return. This opportunity definitely does not come around every single day. So please take advantage of it. And also, my other advice is to max out the amount that they will match you at. So if they say, I will match you up to $3,000, you bet your bottom dollar I'd be contributing $3,000 every single year so that they would match that, and I'd have a total of $6,000 contributed every single year. Now, the nice part about this type of account is that all of your contributions are made pre-tax and the money grows tax-free until you withdraw it. Another type of retirement account you can look into if you work for someone else is a Roth IRA. Now, if you're self-employed like I am, there are a few different retirement account options that you can look into based on your income level. So you could also look into a Roth IRA, you could look into a SEP IRA, or even a solo 401k. Now, depending on which type of accounts we're talking about, there are certain benefits to each of these, like, for example, being tax-free, so not paying tax on dividends or capital gains. And that solo 401k could potentially be set up to be some kind of an equivalent to the employer matching that I was talking about previously if you own your own business. So the point here is to essentially max out your contributions to all of these different retirement accounts before investing in other options to really fortify your financial future. And I know that this isn't really fun or rewarding right now, believe me, I know, but your future self will really thank you. Principle number 3, set a firm limit on living expenses. Now, this simply comes down to budgeting and tracking your expenses. Now, I personally do this every single month on the 1st because on the 1st, I'm running all the numbers for the businesses, I'm paying employees, and at the same time, I make sure to figure out personally how much I'm spending. So I have an ongoing Excel spreadsheet, and I make sure on the 1st, when I'm doing all my other numbers, that I go through every single expense for me personally. How much money did I make? How much money did I spend? Probably on my mortgage, on my car, insurance, gas, groceries, health insurance, dental, vision, all those things, gym membership, but also recurring subscriptions. So Netflix, Spotify, SiriusXM radio, because I'm in my car a lot for the real estate business. And maybe I had a month where I treated myself to something, or maybe I had a month where I invested more than I normally do. So I make sure to write down every single expense that month, even down to the penny. So let's say I meet some girlfriends for dinner and I go out for dinner and park in a parking garage and I had to pay $2 for the parking garage. That is in my spreadsheet. Maybe I got coffee for $5. That's in my spreadsheet too. So every single penny that I spent is written down. And then once everything is written down in my spreadsheet, I go through and I make a mental note of, oh, I don't remember signing up for this subscription. I can cancel this, or I don't recognize this charge. Call and cancel this. Or maybe next month I would like to invest more. I don't want to spend as much on this, or I think I could spend a little bit more here next month. And essentially, I just get a really good picture of my financial situation every single month. Now, I challenge you to do the exact same thing for the next 60 days and see, maybe it's enlightening. Maybe you didn't know you were paying for a subscription that you can cancel. A lot of people have a lot of subscriptions that they don't even remember having. And a lot of people, sadly, don't check their credit card statements and don't even really pay attention to their bank account unless maybe they overdraw it or they can't pay their bills or something really catastrophic happens. Now, I say this because living expenses have a funny way of creeping up, especially as you make more money. Now, we just came through the holiday season, so maybe you got a nice little holiday bonus. Maybe you got a raise and you're thinking to yourself, life is good. I'm living large. You know what? I'm going to treat myself to X, Y, and Z. Or maybe that house that you're living in that you just bought is starting to feel a little bit too small. Or maybe that car that you bought just 2 years ago, it's feeling a little bit old. You want a newer model. Or maybe as you make more money, you're thinking, well, I don't need to buy that Walmart brand shampoo anymore. I can go to Sephora and buy some much nicer shampoo. Now, if you can't afford those things, that's great for you. But a word to the wise, just be careful, especially with those bigger ticket items. Because with the price of housing and current interest rates, you could end up paying double your current mortgage pretty easily. Or if you decide to upgrade your car and perhaps you want to finance it, car interest rates are equally high, and even used car interest rates can be as high as 11%. So don't allow that promotion that you're getting at work to essentially put you into a financial backslide by overspending. Now, again, I'm not saying that you should never buy a nicer car, that you should never buy a nicer house, but I am saying that maybe once you get that promotion, once you get that holiday bonus, maybe you wait a few months, maybe you wait a year. And again, you really build up that nest egg to make sure that you can afford 3 to 12 months of living expenses in that new house that you want, or with that new, nicer car that you want. And again, give yourself a little bit of extra cushion while also planning for your future goals. Now, simultaneously, like I said, as I track every single item that goes through my bank account, maybe you could also reflect on that and think about subscription services, again, that you could cancel. Potentially, if you're renting, maybe you could try to negotiate a little bit lower rent. I know that in some areas there has been a little bit of rental market correction. So now could be the time to have that conversation with your landlord. Now, obviously, if you own a home, now is not the time to be refinancing your home. But maybe if we see a market correction in the next 3 to 5 years, you could potentially consider refinancing your home so that you could pay less on your mortgage each month. Maybe you could also even consider cutting back on grocery expenses. So maybe if you do all of your grocery shopping at Whole Foods currently, Maybe you could do a combination of Whole Foods and Costco, or just completely switch to Costco for some cost savings. Now, we were previously talking about the high cost of transportation. Maybe if you live in the city, you could consider taking more public transportation to save on gas, or carpooling, or maybe potentially even selling your car altogether. And if you have to own a car, maybe try shopping around for cheaper car insurance. So my point in saying all of this is that there's usually a place to cut back on something. And I'm not saying don't enjoy the little things in life. I'm saying try to find savings on your bigger ticket items, refinancing your home, decreasing your rent, paying less for your car, paying less for those big ticket items, so that if you have things that you want to treat yourself to, if you want to splurge on, then you won't feel as guilty about doing that. Because while having a good rein on your finances is so important, once you set yourself up for financial success with the tips that I'm talking about in this video, I am a firm believer that you should take time to celebrate what you have accomplished, to let loose a little bit, to maybe treat yourself within reason, of course, to things that will make you happy. Otherwise, all of the work that you've put in, all of the challenges that you've overcome are a surefire way to result in burnout. And burnout really isn't productive for anybody. Take it from someone who has been there, and it takes a while to recover from. So I do truly believe that you will be more successful in sticking to your financial goals in the long run if you figure out ways to save money on those bigger ticket items and allow yourself a little bit more flexibility and freedom when it comes to potentially treating yourself, of course, in a reasonable way. And I always kind of like to equate this to maybe New Year's resolutions. So typically fitness or maybe dieting is a big part of some people's New Year's resolutions. And let's say you say, I want to go to the gym 3 hours every single day, 7 days a week, absolutely no exception. I would be burnt out in the first week, my God. So I don't want you to fall off the financial bandwagon. I want you to set yourself up for financial success in the future and make this a really attainable long-term goal. And honestly, I found that if people don't carve out just a little bit of guilt-free spending money every single month, it doesn't have to be a ton of money. It could be less than $100, less than $50. But if you don't feel like you can treat yourself to even the most minimal thing, oftentimes people completely fall off the bandwagon. They completely give up on their long-term financial goals, or maybe they end up overspending and completely end up blowing their budget. And now they're starting again from zero. So my point in saying all of that is that as with every single thing in life, moderation is key. Principle number 4, focus on acquiring assets. This is probably one of the biggest differences that I notice, especially among my own generation. So I am a millennial. And this is, again, the biggest difference that I notice between people who are just scraping by financially and people who are really setting themselves up for financial success. Now, I sadly think that the American dream has kind of turned into the American nightmare of all these people feeling like, for some reason, they need to keep up with the Joneses. They need to have the nicest, newest house. They need to have the nicest, newest car. They need to finance this and that. And of course, they need to finance those things over the longest term possible so that their monthly payment is minimal. And this is what we all in the finance community know as debt snowballing. And it's crazy because even now, if you're buying just the smallest thing on Amazon, like a pair of pants, they'll ask you, do you want to pay for this in 4 installments of X amount instead of just paying $50 today, $80 today? And I'm assuming they offer this option because a large portion of their demographic accepts it and does want to pay on installments rather than just paying the amount up front. Now, I don't personally really understand this whole keeping up with the Joneses situation, because while you may appear as if you're doing great, everything is swell, on the back end, your life is a financial nightmare. And that is the absolute worst feeling in the entire world. So I would bet of all these people posting online, I got new this, I got new that, look at this house I just bought my new car, only a very small percentage of the people actually posting about those things can actually afford them. And I would sadly say that most of America is on spending autopilot. They'll swipe their card, I'll buy this, they tap their card to pay. It's kind of like virtual money. They almost think it's not real money until they log into their account at the end of every month and realize that they can't pay their credit card off. Or now they're in $25,000 of credit card debt. Or now they can't pay for their car. Now they can't pay for their house. And now their house is being foreclosed on. And again, that debt snowball can catch up with you very quickly. And all of this card swiping is almost an addictive behavior. There was actually a recent study done that every time you swipe your credit card, the reward portion of your brain essentially lights up, making you want to do that over and over and over again, leading to that spending snowball. But at a certain point, you have to get really honest with yourself if you want to live and manage your money like the top 1% does. What are your long-term goals? When would you like to achieve those goals? What is standing in the way? I'm going to be honest, most of the time, it's you. What do you have control over? And what changes can you implement? Now, I have absolutely no problem financing and appreciating assets. So for example, I'm talking about a property, buying a house, buying an investment property. And you all know that I work as a real estate investor, so I have absolutely no issue with taking very calculated risks and spending money on properties that I know are going to make me a return in the long run. Now, when I'm buying real estate, I focus on buying the property for the right number. So I'm not overspending from the get-go. I spend a reasonable amount paying cash to renovate each property, and then I maximize rents on the other side. And during this entire process, I make sure that I'm obviously paying the principal balance on the mortgage. So I am gaining equity in the property, just owning it. I'm also cash flowing a pretty good amount on every single property that we own every month. And I'm also gaining money simply by appreciation based on where we live. Other appreciating assets can be stocks, bonds, very specific art, rare cars, precious metals, investing in a business, either your own or angel investing, and even buying farmland. Now, I would also recommend diversifying the asset classes that you're purchasing. Now, I've talked about the real estate that I own on this channel before. I also have a good amount of money in the market. And then between my husband and I, we both have multiple businesses. So we have worked really hard to put ourselves in a position so that every single day we are building wealth on at least 3 separate fronts. So now time for a very unpopular opinion, but my personal opinion is if it's not an appreciating asset, I'm paying for it in cash. Now, probably the biggest ticket item that you're thinking of are cars. And yes, cars are hugely expensive. And most cars, I would say 99% of cars are depreciating assets, unless we're talking about a really old vintage car that's now going up in value, or a really rare supercar that, again, is very limited edition, now is going up in value. And if you're watching this and thinking, oh crap, I have a lot of depreciating asset debt, that's okay. That's probably like most people watching this video. And the good news is that that's very fixable. Now, I think I've talked about this before, but when I graduated with my second college degree, I came out of that round of schooling with about $80,000 in debt. And at that time, a lot of that debt was financed at about an 8% interest rate. So my number one goal was to obviously pay off that really high interest debt first. So my point in saying that is if you are in a similar situation, if you have a really high interest rate on your car payment, I would focus on paying off that really high interest rate debt first, and then slowly working your way down. So maybe you have some 8% debt, maybe you have 5% debt and 3% debt. I would leave that 3% debt to pay off last, because paying off the higher interest rate debt is going to save you way more money in the long run. So as long as you have your emergency fund saved up and you can afford to do so, I would make your main focus completely paying off your depreciating asset debt. I actually did get a comment on one of my recent YouTube videos, basically where I was talking about how much house you can afford. And some guy got really upset and was basically saying, so no American can ever afford a house or a car. Got it. And I feel like that just kind of speaks to the American mindset around money, right? If you are backed into a corner, if you can't afford your bills, yeah, I feel like that's going to be your initial response, is to get really defensive rather than taking a really open mindset approach, thinking about how you can actually set yourself up for a good financial future, how to not continue to snowball your debt into oblivion. Now, in addition to any outstanding high interest student loan debt you might have, probably a lot of people are paying a pretty hefty amount for their car each and every month. Now, I wanted to kind of switch to this kind of controversial topic and really encourage people to consider paying cash for their cars. And I say this because cars tank like a rock. So as soon as you buy that car and you drive it off the parking lot, you are losing 10% immediately as soon as you drive away from that car dealership. And then in 5 years, when you're likely still paying that car off, your car isn't even worth 40% of what you're paying it off for. And so that being said, I do feel like car debt is a huge reason that people stay in poor financial situations in this country. And so my advice to you, again, if you're going to buy a car, buy that car in cash, because it's a depreciating asset anyway. And so again, to me, it simply doesn't make sense to pay somewhere between a 7 and 11% interest rate on a car that is depreciating in value. Now, I have paid for every single car I've purchased in the past decade in cash. I know plenty of other people that are now doing that because interest rates are so incredibly high. And the point of saying this is really to save you money in the long run. So again, this is a rule that my husband and I both have. We both stick to this rule. And if you want a nice car, you better start saving. Now, the same thinking could basically be applied to anything. So maybe you need some new appliances, some new siding, maybe you need new windows, new furniture, or maybe you want to treat yourself to a new flat screen TV. Now, again, if you can't afford to buy those things in full, I think it's completely fine to save up for a while and just buy them when you can. Because again, as soon as you bring those items home, they're going to be worth significantly less than what you paid for them. A second-hand refrigerator is worth considerably less than a brand new one. Same thing with a flat screen TV. Same thing with furniture. The resale value on those items simply are not very good. And for that reason, I am a huge fan of buying things secondhand. So let someone else take the depreciation hit if they want new furniture, if they want new appliances. And then you can get a deal buying them secondhand on Craigslist, on Facebook Marketplace, and those things can save you so much money in the long run. So that was a very long-winded way to essentially encourage you to be strategic about the debt that you're taking on. Focus on buying appreciating debt, so things like real estate that will pay you in the future instead of buying debt that's going to financially drown you. Principle number 5, don't rely on other people to manage your money for you. Now, again, I feel like this could be quite a controversial topic, as a lot of these financial principles are today. So I'm going to preface this all by saying absolutely no hate to financial advisors, but my husband and I both spent quite a bit of time essentially studying and investing in the market. And we feel very comfortable managing our own money. And to be quite frank, managing our own money and then also bootstrapping our own businesses and learning how to build those from the ground up is what has afforded us to essentially see the success that we have today. And my point in saying this is that I feel like personally, I value real world experience. So over the past decade, we have both built our businesses from the ground up. We've both taken an entire decade to understand how to responsibly invest in the market, responsibly invest in appreciating assets, and how to deal with all of these negative financial habits that seem to be so common in the American marketplace. And so I personally don't like the idea of paying somebody, by somebody I mean a financial advisor, somewhere between 0.5% and 2% to essentially tell me what to do with my money and to probably tell me something that I could have figured out on my own. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way at all. I think it's incredibly smart to have a team around you to help you in areas where it's needed. So we do have a team of attorneys that help us with our real estate business to keep all of our leases up to date and to make sure that as legislation changes, those changes are reflected in our leases. And they all know way more about law than I will ever know. We also have a team of accountants who help us each tax season for all the businesses that we run, our investments, and to figure out the best way to make retirement contributions. And that team obviously is a huge lifesaver and obviously knows more about the accounting side of our numbers than I ever will. And they have the time to dedicate to doing so. So I think choosing who you surround yourself, choosing very strategically who is on your team, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and getting help in the areas where you need it is what will get you to that 1% status. And as an example, let's say you have $1 million invested that you're paying a financial advisor to help you manage. They'll take $10,000 on your million every single year to help you manage that, making you $10,000 a year poorer. Meaning that in 30 years, you'll be $300,000 poorer. And instead, if you would have invested that $10,000 into the market with a roughly 8% return, that's an extra $1.3 million for you in retirement, not in someone else's pocket. And I think $1.3 million is enough to motivate just about anybody to educate themselves on investing. And I'll end this principle with the age-old adage of give a man or woman a fish and you'll feed them for a day. Teach a man or woman to fish and you'll feed them for a lifetime. Principle number 6, invest in yourself. Now, if you've done everything that I talked about in the previous steps, you don't have any debt, you don't frivolously spend, you're on top of your finances, you have a long-term financial plan that you're working toward, and you have an emergency fund, but maybe you're not making progress as quickly as you would like to, then it's likely time to start investing in yourself. By that, I mean figuring out ways to increase your income, because honestly, sometimes if you make 30 grand a year, if you make 50 grand a year, There's only so much you can do, so many positive steps that you can take forward before you simply have to just make more money to meet those goals. Now, maybe if you've really been excelling at work, you really enjoy your job and you want to stay at that job, maybe it's time to ask for a raise or for a promotion to a different position. But make sure that you're going into that meeting with your boss very well prepared. So maybe even make a PowerPoint presentation pointing out that you've been working overtime lately, you haven't been getting paid for that overtime, you've been going above and beyond, you've been really leading team meetings, anything XYZ that you've been doing that you think really helps your case for earning extra money, for getting that promotion, for earning that higher position within your company. And really focus on making a legitimate case. So essentially, when you're asking for a raise, you're going to your boss and saying, I think the value that I'm providing to this company is worth more. And here's why. And if your company simply says no to your raise or to your promotion, or maybe that's just not in their budget at the time, then you have to decide if maybe now is the time to start looking for a different job. And oftentimes, to get the pay increase that you want, you'll kind of need to shop your similar job around to other companies to see who is willing to pay you more, whether that's a more competitive salary, more competitive bonuses, or even additional benefits. And if you're looking for more, maybe now is the time to start that side hustle you've been thinking about. Or maybe even open a full-time business for yourself. And if you have that initial emergency fund set aside that we talked about all the way back in principle number 1, then you essentially have afforded yourself a luxury to maybe take a little bit of extra risk now to get a little bit more reward. Now, the hardest part about managing your money, like the top 1%, is just starting. If you thought today's video was helpful, please do me a huge favor and hit that thumbs up button so that I know to continue creating similar content. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, feel free to follow me on my social channels right here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.